Good to have everybody here. So this is our first official meeting. Kenny, just give me the thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, good. So welcome. I guess just for business-wise, we're going to have meetings every week, but those meetings will be, most of them, I would say 95% will be just pre-recorded meetings just like this one. And I think they're pretty helpful. They tend to run about 30 minutes, 40 minutes maybe at most. And what I try to do in those meetings is just cover stuff that I think is particularly tricky from the chapters that we're on or the week's worth of stuff that we're looking at. So I'll do a little bit of that today. Just remember too that the meetings are mandatory, but you don't have to attend them live. By mandatory, what we mean is you just have to at least watch it. So I think that's the game plan at the very least for the rest of the semester. And I'll probably do at least like 2 more live meetings. But for the time being, just make sure you're clicking on the links and watching those. Do I have any questions from people? Yeah, go for it, Kenny. Let me get you. There we go. Yeah, what's up, man?
Okay, so I have a Bio 181 class that starts at 10:15. Will this run into that at all, or can I skip out 5 minutes early?
Yeah, no, I think we'll be done. So it's interesting, like research suggests that online classes that are that have meetings like this, if they're longer than like 6 minutes, and people don't watch them or pay attention as well. But we're never going to go 6 minutes. We'll at least go like 20.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, you should be golden.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so let me share my screen. Oh yeah, Marlissa, right? Let me unmute you, Marlissa. There we go. Yeah, what's going on?
Okay, my name is Mary Lisa.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
I was wondering on the transcripts for when you watch the video presentations, the first one opens, the next ones don't open. And so for me, it's really helpful to have the written transcript to study from and to follow along so that I can kind of underline what I think are the most important parts. Is there any way to get those? Because when you hit that, it links back into the video again.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen.
Yeah, above each one of the videos, there's like a little place that you can print the transcript and read it. And it works on the first one, but it doesn't on the next ones under all the different videos, like, you know, how it explains all the philosophers and everything.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I thought you were talking about the class meetings, and I was like, I don't think I have that. Yeah, so maybe, I guess I wonder if they have those. I can double check.
Okay.
Because what I think they have them for is just for hearing impaired individuals. But I'll look and see if I can get transcripts for the rest. 1 sec.
I haven't tried to open them, but there is one at the very bottom that's supposed to be all of them.
Okay.
Oh.
Have you tried that?
I didn't try that. I will try it and see if it works.
I haven't tried it, so I'm not telling you that it works. I saw that and wondered if you had gone down and tried the very bottom.
Yeah. Well, Mary, check that out, and then let me know if you can't, and then I'll
okay.
Do it on my end.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a question really quick. Brother Hatch, this is Carrie Cox.
Yeah, sounds good, Kay.
So really quick, on the research or on my where you do the field study, you know, and you post it on the website, it wouldn't open for me. So I just posted it in the discussion area just to show that I did it on time. So the actual page would not open for me to post that and to show that I did that.
Okay. Carrie, let me write your name down. Mike, did you maybe sign up for the course close to the deadline or maybe just after?
No.
No? Because sometimes that'll happen. Like if you signed up, I create the groups like the day class officially starts, but sometimes people will register just after that.
Oh, maybe.
Let me see what happened there. So basically it sounds like you're not in a group to get feedback on the field reports, right?
Well, it just wouldn't open. I took it. Let me see what the screen said. I took a picture of it just
Give you
to
some kind of error, I bet.
be able to tell you. Yeah, it was just an error. Exactly.
Okay.
Error screen. And so I just posted it on the discussion question
Okay.
board in order to show that I did it. But
Okay. Yeah, I bet that's what it is. Let me see. That's an easy fix that I can do. So I'll just go back in, and if you have troubles next week, for sure, just let me know. But I'm pretty sure I can fix that for you.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good stuff. Any other questions? Great.
So that was one of the things, the assignments, and I still need to do it because I missed that the link was in, anyway, I was looking for the link. And so can you open that back up so I can still do it, even though I will lose the 10% points?
Yeah, I can barely hear you. Let's do this. Why don't you just email me, and I'll send you a reply back.
Okay, yeah, I did email you, so
Okay.
hopefully not hurting in your inbox.
Okay. Tell me your name. I just can't hear you very well.
It's Anna Hall.
Okay, Anna. All right. Yeah, I'll email you back here pretty quick.
And I'm sorry, Brother Hatch, but for me to do the next part of the assignment without having any feedback, then what do I do? Just note that, or?
Yeah, I just note it and send it in.
Okay.
Yep. By next week, it should be all ironed out. Because what happens is they'll make sure everyone's in, and then I can put everyone in a group. That should solve the problem. Great. Okay. All right, guys, let's get going. So I'm just going to call on people because I like to do that, if that makes sense. Because I think it's more fun that way. Let's go back. Oops. Okay. So tell me about your perception of psychology. Like when you decided to take this class, probably because you had to, but you should because it's awesome. Take it. But what's the first thing that crossed your mind when you decided to take this class? Let's go with Kieran because I haven't called on you yet. What do you think, man?
Can you say the question one more time?
Yeah. Like just when you thought about taking a psychology class, what was it that crossed your mind? Like what's the first thought you have when you think psychology?
I don't know. I took a psychology class in high school and I just thought it was interesting.
Okay, good. So you're already a believer. That's what I like to hear. But so now after even that experience, what do you think about psychology? Just in general.
I like just kind of learning about how people think and stuff.
That's good. Yeah. So just learning more about how people think or maybe why they think the ways they do sometimes. I think that's fantastic. Go, Beth. What about you?
All right, there we go. Kind of the same. I find it interesting to find out what people think. But at the same time, it seems like so many people all have different views. And a lot of times they clash with each other. Yeah. And like some of these guys, I think they're a little bit crazy. I don't know. It's weird. It's very diverse.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, I like it. So we do have differing views that clash often. And we even have that within the discipline of psychology. And to be fair, there are some crazy, stupid stuff that some people think about and say in psychology. We'll learn about Freud, and he has just some crazy, stupid crap. That's some of it I think is still very, very applicable. A good chunk of it. In fact, a lot of the things that Freud said, for instance, are sort of like current research with newer technology allows us to find out that some of the things he thought were totally true. But a good chunk of what he thought is just bonkers. And you'll hear about that and you'll know what I mean when we get there. But I like what you're saying. We have different views that clash, right? I think that's fair. Let's keep going. How about, let's scroll down here. How about Kimmy? What about you?
Um, Sorry, I'm in a kind of a public area in school. So as far as perception of psychology, I have a neighbor who's a who's a psychiatrist, and she works with she specializes in trauma.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Like every time I go to visit her, and like other people that I've known, they're always like, they tend to be some of the happier people that I've known. I don't know if that's just the people I've been around, but it almost seems like they understand themselves to the point of they know their limits. They know how to think about things in a positive way. And I just kind of like that.
I think that sounds
They
great.
know themselves.
Yeah, I like it, Kenny. So in that sense, it maybe could provide us with information that could make us happier, right? I teach a positive psychology class, which is essentially the study of factors that lead to happiness. I think it's one of the most fascinating areas in psychology. It's sort of a relatively new area. We've spent a whole bunch of time in psychology looking at what's wrong with people, which is kind of like weird if you think about it, right? I teach an abnormal class. The whole entire class is looking at how we're kind of jacked up. And it wasn't until relatively recently within the discipline that we decided we should look at what makes people happy as well. But I certainly think that science can provide that for us. So let me get into this. Lots of times when I'll ask students in classes, kind of like you guys, they'll say something like this, that psychology is just pure common sense. That it's like, why do we need to have a class about stuff that we already know? And I think that's a reasonable critique to some degree. So let me ask that. Why should we have a psychology class if a good bit of what we talk about or learn about is common sense? Let me have Beth answer that one.
Sorry. Okay. Well, some of it's common sense, but I feel like a lot of it's not. Or maybe it's common sense now, but it wasn't before. So a lot has changed, and we were learning like Aristotle and Plato. The things that they were realizing is common sense now, but it wasn't for them. It was groundbreaking. And that's important for us to learn.
Sure. Yeah, I like it. So maybe some of these earlier thoughts from philosophy were maybe the first time people had like systematically written about that stuff, and that's pretty interesting and helpful for us to know. And some of it probably is common sense, some of it isn't. Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. That that a lot of times it's maybe stuff that we are familiar with but haven't like concretely looked at. I think another common thing that we have happen in psychology is we have what's called like folk wisdom, right? We'll have two ideas that both kind of seem correct. And this is one of them. Birds of a feather flock together, or opposites attract. So if you think about that, this is kind of the problem and to some degree like the reason why we need psychology. Because we have two ideas that both seem fairly true, right? Birds of a feather flock together, or opposites attract. And psychology can help us decide which of those two is correct. So, Mikkel, what do you think? Which one of those is right? Is it birds of a feather flock together, or is it opposites attract? Oh, you got to unmute yourself. Let me help you out. Hold on. Okay, now I can hear you. Say it. Just start over if you can, Mikkel.
Okay, sorry. So I think both can be true. I think it depends on what you're talking about. I think a lot of my friends they do things that are the same things that I like to do. We go on backpacking trips together and those kind of things. So I think in that sense, birds of a feather flock together. But my husband and I are very different. I'd say we are opposites.
Yeah.
So I think both could be true.
Okay. I think that's reasonable. And absolutely correct. I think both are true. And I think that's what psychology offers us, right? Like we look at these two sayings and they both seem true. We can think of instances at the very least in our heads. It's opposites attract. And we can also think of instances in our heads where it's birds of a feather flock together. So that's why we need something like psychology to help us sort this out a little bit. See, someone's babies in the background. I'm trying to figure out how to mute that, but I like the sounds anyway. So let me get James to chime in here. Which one do you think is right or more right? Birds of a feather flock together or opposites attract? Go for it, James.
Well, personally, I think that the birds of a feather flock together because, like, people who have the same interests and the same ideas, they tend to gravitate towards each other and to be like, oh, I like this. Oh, I like this too. Let's hang out and do things and interact. And I know that's happened a lot for me in my friendships. But I could also put up an argument for opposites attract as well. But personally, for me, I think birds of a feather is much more realistic, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay, I like it. I think you're probably correct. That's kind of what happens. Hey, Mikkel, could you mute your mic one time? Oh, there we go. I got it. Okay. So yeah, I think you're right, James, that you can kind of look for these instances and see maybe both, but I guess I would lean more towards birds of a feather flock together as well. Now here's where psychology and science comes in, right? We have these two, to some degree, like opposing views. And what we can do is take psychology and systematically study which one of these is more true, right? And when we do that, what we find is that it's birds of a feather flock together. And so when we look at marital satisfaction, for instance, the people that are the happiest and the people that meet and fall in love the quickest and soonest are those that have common interests. Now, Mikkel might be freaking out because she's like, well, me and my husband are opposites attract, which is unfortunate. No, it's not. It's fine, right? So where does the opposites attract idea come from? Let me get Beth to answer that. What do you think? Where does this opposites attract idea come from?
Okay. Well, because it does occur, probably, like Mikkel and her husband. And so you get these two different ideas because they both do occur. But from what you're saying, it sounds like birds of a feather is what's more common. So
Good. Right. And that's what happens in psychology. It's one of the things that can offer us is that we look at like big data sets and we can say for most people, this is how it is that happens. And there's certainly exceptions to the rule. And maybe that's Mikkel. Although here's what I would bet happened because I can look at my own personal experience. Once you live with somebody for like 4 months to 15 years, in my case, what do you start to notice after like a month or two? Let me get Mary. Go for it. Oh, hold on.
Me?
Say it again. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just thinking that that we start to become more and more like each other. And so I really think birds of a feather flock together. And plus, I've read a ton of studies on marital studies, and the more you are alike, the chances are you're going to stay together.
Yeah. So I think that's true. And it probably is true that you start to get more and more similar. Like my wife maybe didn't love to read as much before we got married, but because I'm kind of a nerd that way, she likes to read more. So I think you're on the right track, but I think what, at least in my experience, is I start noticing all the ways that we're different. Like for instance, my wife, when she cooks, she opens every cupboard door. It's bizarre. Like I'll just walk in the kitchen after she's done cooking and I'll just shut all the cupboard doors because she's got them all open. In fact, I found this out the hard way when I tried to help her at one point. Like I bent down to get a pan for her. She opened up the cupboard above, and again, she just leaves it open. So then when I stand up, it like T-bones me in the back of the head. And in that moment, I realized, hey, we're different. We're like way different. So probably what drew me to her to begin with were our similarities. But after like 3 or 4 months or 15 years, I start to notice the ways that we are, in fact, different. right? So then that's where that folk wisdom maybe could come from, is that I notice those differences and think, well, maybe we're opposites, right? And where we're different, we're really different, as it turns out. So at least you have an idea of maybe where these two folk wisdom sayings come from, and you can kind of see how they both might be correct. But this is the key, right? What psychology offers us is a chance to systematically explore that and find out which one is more true, or in the instances that each one of them could be true. And if you think about what psychology is and what makes it unique, is that in all the different areas that you're studying in college, like let's take a literature class, right? You take a literature class, you probably really like it. You're reading some books that speak to you. And probably what makes those books really, really good is that they understand their characters and the psychology behind them, and we can relate to that really easily. But what makes psychology different then from really good literature and psychology? What would be the difference between those two things? Let me get, let's do, I don't know, all I have is your email. So base 1707. What do you think?
I would say, hold on.
So we're talking about, we've got an awesome literature class or an awesome book that you're reading in psychology. They both are looking at like human nature and why we do what we do, but what makes psychology then different from like a really good book?
I think because psychology, you're implementing science. Here, can you hear me?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, okay. You're implementing science and you're systematically studying people, whereas with literature, you're just looking on the outside, how they interact with each other, what you're used to seeing. And literature, you can see inside the character's head already. The book is telling you what they're feeling, whereas with psychology, you kind of have to dig to see, because we can't just see into each other's minds like you can when you're reading a book.
Perfect. That's perfect. Right. So that's exactly right. Right. And that's kind of the point I want to make here, is that psychology really is in a whole lot of different fields. But what makes it unique from literature and good books and political science, and I mean, almost every other discipline, with the exception of maybe like the hard sciences, is that psychology looks at those same things, but it uses the scientific method to help us like decide which one is the more accurate perception of how we think and why we think in the ways that we do. So what we do then is we figure out systematic ways to look at this stuff. And that's what we're going to be talking about now. In this next week, we're going to look at research methodologies. And I'm going to talk about two different types of research methodologies today. But first, I want to entertain this idea. My favorite football team is the Dallas Cowboys. So if our objective for a second is to decide if the Dallas Cowboy football team truly is great, which they are, how would I, what are the various ways I could decide that they're the best team of all time? So let me get someone to answer that one. Let's go, Jeff. What do you think? How would I decide whether or not the Dallas Cowboy football team is truly greatest of all time? Oh, wait, hold on. I muted you. There we go.
That entirely depends on your perception of what you're looking at.
Good.
I may look at stats. You may look at how many championships they've won over 50 years. So it's all dependent on what we're looking at.
Perfect. That's exactly right. And exactly the point I want to make. So I could spend all day talking about how great they are. They've won 5 Super Bowls. They've been to 7. They have a significant amount of Hall of Famers. But Jeff's idea is exactly the point I want to make. It just depends on which area you're interested in, right? If I was interested in how much money they make, in the billions, I think they're the second or first most valuable team from a monetary standpoint in the NFL. Then that would be the right approach, right? Because I'd be looking at money and I care about that. So that would be the right approach. If I'm a fantasy football manager, though, then I care about how well their quarterback plays or how many touchdowns Des Bryant catches, right? It kind of depends on which area I'm interested in. Now, this same idea is applicable when we think about research methodology. When we think about research methods, we want to look at all of them. And sometimes we have this tendency to want to say, well, which one's the best one? And there is no best one, because it kind of depends on what you're interested in finding out. And what you're interested in finding out is going to dictate which research method you're going to pick. right? So we know that human behavior is super complex, and there's more than one right way to look at it. It just depends on which area or what each one could offer you, and that is dependent upon which one you choose is dependent upon which one you're interested in. So we've got three major kind of things, right? When we look at the, broadly speaking, these research designs, we have research settings, we have research data collection methods, and we have research designs. And if you put these on a grid, this is what I like to do, is put them on a grid. It's going to look something like this, right? And the first thing that you could look at would be the research settings, right? And you have two different kinds, field settings and laboratory settings. And each of them offer like strengths and weaknesses. You could then look at something like research methodologies or research designs. And each of those would have like strengths and weaknesses. And again, like there's no right one. Sometimes we have like a gold standard, which would be like experimental design. But there's huge problems with experimental design that you'll learn about in this next chapter. And then finally, we could look at data collection methods, right? Self-report versus observation. And there's both strengths and weaknesses in each of those. And each of them are no more right or wrong to use. It just depends on what you're interested in and the information that you want to find. So to begin with, let's talk just briefly today in our little meeting here about field versus laboratory research settings. So field designs take place in natural environments, like a football stadium maybe, or a playground or a grocery store or a lunchroom, right? Any of those would be considered like a field setting. They're not really controlled by the researcher, and this is both good and bad. So let me grab, again, I just have your email, RAM12009. What do you think is the problem with field settings? Why is this a bad idea?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of it can be good because you're observing people like in their natural way, but at the same time, if you're like creeping and watching over their shoulder or something, it can affect how people act, especially if they think they're being watched. Remember it said that in the readings. Yeah,
for sure. So like if they're going to behave differently if they believe that they're being observed. That's correct. And they do both have strengths and weaknesses. So and one of those weaknesses would maybe be if they know they're being watched in a field design, that could be problematic. So good. Yeah, totally. Let's grab somebody else now. Give me another reason. Madison, what do you got? Oh, I can't unmute you. There we go.
Well, like if you think about if it's at like a football stadium or at the grocery store, just somewhere that's out in public, or even if it's just in your apartment, there might be some like third variables that are out there, like some interference from somewhere else that might get in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Let's say I'm looking at ADHD, right? I want to see if parenting style has an impact on ADHD symptoms. But, and I just go to their houses and watch, right? One of the third variables there that could be happening is maybe they watch a whole lot of Phineas and Ferb, a cartoon that's actually super awesome. And if they watch that a lot, maybe that makes them a little bit more hyper. And if they're watching that more than maybe other people, I can't control that. So that could impact my study pretty powerfully. Good job. All right. So we look at this then, broadly speaking, we got strengths. No one said this yet, but it's true that field settings are good because they're closer to reality, right? We can generalize more easily in these kinds of contexts because they are very similar to the kinds of contexts that we would find in everyday life, depending on whatever it is that we're studying. So that's kind of a nice thing in that way. But a powerful weakness that Madison brought up and others is that we can't control these extraneous variables, and that's pretty problematic, right? Like if I want to know for sure if something's happening, I've got to be able to control all parts of it except for the one variable that I'm interested in. And then if there's a difference between the two groups, I can say conclusively it's because of that one variable, right? And in field settings, we can't really do that because the advantage of them is that they're closer to normal life, but because of that, I can't control everything. So that's the big problem with field designs is on the one hand, they're great because they're closer to reality, to normal life. But on the other hand, they stink because you can't control stuff that you maybe want to control. which leads us to our next design, a laboratory setting, right? So let me grab somebody else. Let's go with Paige. Paige, talk to me about what you think a strength or a weakness of laboratory settings would be.
So a strength is your variables are able to be controlled, and a weakness is sometimes you probably people do different things when they know you're watching me.
Okay. Yeah, someone mentioned that before, right? That we behave differently when we're being observed. That's for sure. But yeah, you can control stuff, right? Let's say, for instance, Paige, that I want to look at texting and how big of an impact texting has on driving, right? Think about in a field setting, there's lots of things that could potentially go wrong. Let me ask Tammy, like in that study, Tammy, if I want to look at texting and how much it impacts like how well you drive, like the number of mistakes you might make while driving. In a field setting, what are some things that could go wrong that could kind of mess with my study?
And mute myself. Well, you don't know if well, there's lots of different things as far as if they're driving. You don't know if, are you trying to say if they're driving, if they're making mistakes, or what are you saying?
Yeah, so I would say in this study, I want to know if how much you're texting. If you text while you're driving, does it cause you to make more mistakes? And in a field setting, I'm just going to let you, drive around town and then see if you make more mistakes, for instance. But what could be some problems that might happen as they drive around town, for instance, that might mess with my study and make it harder to know that it's actually just texting that's causing them to make mistakes?
Well, first of all, there's other drivers around. And
Yeah.
You don't know if they were texting as the cause of the problem or if it was actually other drivers. And then if, like I said, if you're being watched, you're going to be a little bit more careful of texting and driving. And there's just lots of different reasons. And I'm sorry, I'm feeling a little sick.
No, you're doing great. This is perfect. Your answer was perfect. So think about that. Oh, sorry, I just muted you again, Tammy. But Tammy's right? Like if you're driving around town, you don't know how other drivers are behaving. Maybe that day that you're doing your study in a field setting, it's just after a basketball game and there's or a concert, right? And the roads are packed. Could that mess with the results of your study powerfully? Yeah, big time, right? That would totally mess them up because in that case, there might be more drivers on the road and you're trying to figure out if texting causes you to make more mistakes, but maybe it's just that there's more drivers on the road that causes mistakes. I feel like in Rexburg, I don't live there, but it seems like it snows a lot. Or is it it's freaking cold? One of the two or both, right? Like how would snow mess with our study that we're trying to look at here? Let's go with Rebecca on this one.
Well, if you've driven in the snow, you would know. You just have to be more cautious. You can't control your car sometimes. Yeah. Even four-wheel drive doesn't help if you hit ice, and it's just not possible to control.
Good. Right. So we can see a big problem in that context of the field setting because we can't control when it snows or your experience level as a driver when it's snowing. But in a laboratory design, we can solve all of those problems. How? Right? Let me go with Vic. How do we solve all the problems that we just talked about in our sort of like newly created study?
So in this case, we would still be like out on the road, right?
Well, in a laboratory setting, would we be on the road necessarily? We could be, but what would it look like? How would it be different?
I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? So remember when it's a field design, we might just go out on some random road in Rexburg. But if it's a laboratory design, we're probably going to control the entire environment. So we probably stick you in a parking lot We might paint like road lines on that parking lot, but we would make sure that there's nobody else on there, or that if there is somebody else on there, that it's the same person that's always on there for every participant, which is kind of nice, right? So in that sense, we can control exactly who else is on the road in that example, which is kind of a nice thing. But think about this for a second. Let me grab Jennifer. Jennifer, the more I start to control different elements, like I make sure it's sunny for everybody, I make sure that everyone drives the same car, I make sure that everyone has the same experience level driving, I make sure that everyone has the same exact phone, right? Because that could mess with our results as well. The more I start to control stuff, what do I lose?
You start to lose like different scenarios that could actually happen in real life.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to be like that for everyone who's driving on the road all the time.
No, that's weird, right? I mean, you're totally right. If I make everyone drive a Toyota Echo, which is my awesome car, and use an iPhone 7 and drive on a sunny day, and it has to be an automatic, and I make sure there's only one other driver, and they only have to deal with 2 stop signs, that's just not normal, right? I mean, not everyone has that experience. And that's the problem with laboratory. While I can control all kinds of stuff and isolate my one variable I'm interested in, the more I control it, the less and less it starts to look like the real world, and the less generalizable it is to other settings. And that's the major problem. Good job, Jennifer. So when you look at the strengths and weaknesses, we can control these extraneous variables that could mess with our study. We can control all of them, really, because we get to, right? That's the beauty of a laboratory. But the more I do that, the trade-off is that I often make it so that it's too artificial and becomes less and less generalizable. So that's why we have these two kind of competing types of research settings. And they both are really good, just for very different reasons. And they both lead to different results and tell us different things, and they both matter. And just like the Dallas Cowboys, which is in fact the greatest team on earth, but it depends on what I'm interested in, right? And that dictates which sort of like metric I use to decide that they're the greatest team on earth. And it's the same thing in this example that we've been talking about, the research settings, the different designs that we have. Now, if you remember, we talked about that grid. We've got research designs, we've got research settings, and we've got data collection methods. And you'll see throughout the readings that each of them offer strengths and weaknesses, and you can kind of judge which one you want to use or maybe should use based on the needs that you have and what you're trying to find out. So this is where we will end today. Before we wrap up, I want to just see if anyone's got questions. I'm going to hang out for like the next 5-10 minutes or so, and if you've got questions, go ahead and let me know, and if not, we'll just go from there. I'm going to stop the recording now.